Thanks for joining this evening's event. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, you can also follow us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and also our YouTube channel. Tonight, we're very excited to welcome Aubrey Gordon in conversation with Talia Lavin. Anti-fatness is everywhere in what we don't talk about when we talk about fat. Aubrey Gordon, the creator of Your Fat Friend and co-host of the Maintenance Phase podcast, unearths the cultural attitudes and social systems that have led to people being denied basic needs because they are fat, and calls for social justice movements to be inclusive of plus-size people's experiences. Unlike the recent wave of memoirs and quasi self-help books that encourage readers to love and accept themselves, Gordon pushes the discussion further towards our authentic fat activism, which includes ending legal weight discrimination, giving equal access to healthcare for large people, increased access to public spaces, and ending anti-fat violence. Aubrey writes that she did not come to body positivity for self-esteem, but rather for social justice. And by sharing her experiences as well as those of others, she concludes that to be fat in our society is to be seen as an undeniable failure and morally condemnable. Fatness is an open invitation for others to express disgust, fear, and insidious concern. Advancing fat justice and changing prejudicial structures and attitudes will require work from all people. What we don't talk about when we talk about fat is a crucial tool to create a tectonic shift in the way we see, talk about, and treat our bodies, fat and thin alike. Aubrey is joining us from here in Portland, Oregon. And Aubrey will be joined in conversation by Talia Lavin, author of Culture Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. She has written for MSNBC, The New Yorker, The New Republic, The New York Times Review of Books, The Washington Post, The Village Voice, and many other publications. She also does the Substack, The Sword, and The Sandwich. She's joining us tonight from New York City. This evening's event includes an audience Q&A. Please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A button, if you'd like to ask a question at any time. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, you can upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please support Aubrey and Powell's by purchasing a copy of every book from us, a link to buy What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat, as well as a link to buy Talia's book will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. Aubrey, Talia, we're really thrilled to have you with us tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us. What a treat.
I know, this is great. I've never actually been to Powell's in person because I've never made it out to Oregon at all. I'm happy to be joining virtually and with 400 of my closest friends. And also just delighted to be speaking alongside someone I've admired for so long. So in typical Aubrey methodology queen fashion, we had a phone call and then she helps mock up these lovely questions that I will be posing. So the first question is, how do we know each other and why did we want to talk to each other here? And since you called me up tonight, why don't you, how do you know me?
Yeah, that's right. Do up your hair. I mean, like, I feel like first things first, there are about 400 people here, which is incredible. Thank you all for making the time. And like, huge thanks to Talia for doing this with me. I feel like I know Talia for being like one of the biggest badasses on Twitter. I know Talia from sword pictures, from running, from doing a lot of things that I am afraid to do. And from listening to the show. Thanks, bud. And it felt like a good opportunity to have a conversation about you know, sort of what tactics are appropriate for what movements and what moments. It felt like a good opportunity to talk about sort of extremism and how it develops and how it sort of moves through the world. And also it felt like a good opportunity to talk about our experiences of trolling and doxing and our experiences as fat people and just what it means to be fat and a public figure, which is a lot. It means a lot to be fat and a public figure. So that's what I would say. I don't know if you have anything, if I've missed anything in our how we know each other.
No, I mean, I know you because I listen to Maintenance Phase. I like to listen to it while I run, so I can be like, I'm subverting diet culture, even as I engage in this fraught activity. And I was, yeah, super delighted to hear from you. And I also think, you know, as we discussed, you know, anti-fatness and other forms of prejudice, I usually tackle other forms of prejudice as my beat. Forms of prejudice being like the general morass I've chosen to sink myself into. And I think the ways they differ and the ways that they intersect are really fascinating. But yeah, we're also just like two fat queer ladies in the public eye. So we thus have a lot in common. So moving on. How do fatness and anti-fatness show up in our daily lives? And how do they show up in our lives as public figures?
I mean, I'll kick us off and then you should join on in. I mean, I feel like, so you and I talked a little bit earlier today about like, because of who we are and how we appear in the world, we experience the stuff differently. I experience it as a white non-Jewish person who is also what in fat activist spaces we'd call super fat, which means I'm sort of like toward the high end of the plus size spectrum, right? So for me, I would say just as a person, anti-fatness shows up in a lot of places. It shows up in the built environment around me. Like there are chairs that are not built to hold me. There are theater seats that are not built for the width of me, right? Which makes it a little intense to try and go find seating anywhere. Great. I would say it shows up in healthcare. I have struggled at times to find doctors who will treat me at all, and at other times to find healthcare providers who will provide me any other healthcare than just like lose weight and come back when you're thin, and then I'll treat you, right? So I would say all of that. I would say shared transit, right? Like just any of the ways that like any fat person experiences anti-fatness. And I would say on top of that, and this is the thing that's like harder to say and harder to talk about, is that it also comes from most people that I know and love, right? According to Harvard University's implicit bias test, about 4 out of 5 of us have strong bias against fat people and in favor of thin people. So I think even people who have the best of intentions, including myself, end up perpetuating anti-fatness all of the time. I mean, in terms of like being a public figure, it feels like there are sort of 2 main ways, well, 3, that it sort of shows up. One is just like trolling. Like, of course, if you're a fat person, trolls are going to reach for fatness, right? 2 is that I think as a public figure, there are times when people assume that they know what I'm going to say, so they assume that I have said it. So there's like, there have definitely been times with reporters when I've been quoted as saying things that I absolutely didn't say about like being in perfect health, or, you know, upholding that people should be able to lose weight, or whatever those things are that I just are not my scene. But there is sort of this way in which, as a fat person talking about fat stuff, you get sort of lifted up as like a little effigy of the fat acceptance movement, right? That feels tricky. And then I think the last one is that there are folks who are genuinely trying to learn and do better. Some folks in good faith, some folks in bad faith, who sort of expect the level of like bespoke service for that learning, right? Who expect a level of like citations, or want me to get on the phone with them and talk them through how they're not bigoted and I'm the one who needs to adjust my perception of them, right? Like that also feels like sort of part of it for me. How about you, buddy? How would you say Anti-fatness shows up for you?
Oh, so first of all, sorry, I saw all your comments about my audio, so I'll make
Oh.
sure to try and keep my head still. Let me know if you can hear me better. But yeah, I mean, in the fat activist space, I'm a smaller fat. I'm like a size 18 or 20, depending on the brand. So I've had less of the external kind of systemic fatness. I mean, it's shown up in my healthcare for sure. For sure. Yes, like I have skipped GP visits for years because every time it's just like, have you thought about losing weight? And I'm like, all the time. And of course, that's frustrating. This only happened once, but I've been cow called from a car, hey, fatty or whatever. And it's like, come on. It's frustrating. I would say for me, internally, I think one of the things that a lot of fat people feel is like, there's always this sense of like, I'll do X desirable and necessary thing in my life once I've lost weight. It's like, I have to I can't give myself permission to live fully until I've lost weight. And that's an inner barrier that I've really worked hard to move away from and stop sort of denying myself permission to do the things, to live fully and completely, in the body that I have. Because it's a good body. It got me through a plague. It got me, I can run with it. I can even get laid with it, amazingly. And I don't need to wait. I don't. And I think a lot of us are sitting around and waiting until we melt away to do the things that we want to do. And as far as the public figure stuff, I mean, like you mentioned, so I read about Nazis. My book is about Nazis, like neo-Nazis online. And so I've been pissing off those folks for about 5 years. And I'm a Jew. So there's always this, I think we have a question about trolling later, so I won't get too deep into it now. But my fatness, my Jewishness, like these are loci of vulnerability and loci of hate that show up in the ways that people discuss me and react to me as a public figure. And they're just, at this point, like somewhat immutable facts of my life. Like I can't change them, so I can either disappear or continue being a fat queer Jew in public. And I've chosen the latter, but it hasn't always been easy.
Yeah.
Well, so speaking of the nexus between culture warlords and what we talk about when we talk about fat, or what we don't talk about.
Yeah,
we don't talk
it's a real mouthful, but
no, it's great. I mean, I've read it off the screen behind you. What we don't talk about when we talk about fat. How does anti-fatness show up in far-right bigoted movements? How can we better identify, understand, and combat it?
I mean, I'll give us like the play school my first answer to this question. And then I will ask you to like chime in with a masterclass, bud. I mean, I feel like, look, if we're talking about white supremacist movements in particular and anti-Semitic movements, right? Organized far-right racist movements. Anytime you're talking about building a master race, right? You are invoking a kind of body, you are invoking a kind of intellect, you are invoking like a fairly full picture of sort of what it is you're aiming for, right? That picture is inherently reliant on anti-Blackness and historically has been since forever. It is always sort of invoking an image of a non-disabled person, and it's always invoking an image of a thin person. So much so that the Nazi party had, hang on, I'm gonna get the name wrong, the National Socialist League of the Reich for Physical Exercise. So the actual Nazi Party had like a whole government bureau that was dedicated to promotion of German excellence and Aryan excellence in sport through international competitions like the Olympics, but also in promoting a certain kind of physical fitness amongst the country writ large, and amongst white folks writ large. So I mean, it feels to me like it is baked in, but I'm curious about from your end, like I feel like I end up tangling with a lot of people who end up like screeching, but it's about your health, like a banshee. And I feel like you end up tangling with people who are much more involved in organized white supremacist movements. So I'm curious about how it shows up for you.
Well, I mean, yeah, my trolls are not necessarily interested in my health.
Oh, buddy. Oh.
Yeah, but how to put it? Okay, so this is something that we actually talked about before. The question of what is a normative body. Certainly, you covered this in a fantastic way, both in your book and in your BMI episode. Where like, what is the normative body? What is the ideal body? And one of the ways in which that was determined was through a sampling of white men, right? That anything that isn't a white, thin, cis man is a diversion from the norm, and moreover, like a bad deviation from the norm. And when we specifically look in the United States, and actually, if we look back through history a lot, Black bodies in particular were viewed as sort of these curiosities. You can see that in the case of Satya Bartman, who was a Black woman who was sort of, she was paraded around and depicted as a human curiosity because she had, a large ass. So this idea of kind of a larger body, a body that's shaped differently, being a curiosity to the point of dehumanization. That's old. That's an old idea. And in the present, I think that some of the eliminationist style prejudice against fat people, the ways in which, any identity that a far-right movement would object to you gets compounded by your fatness in ways that really, in some ways, my fatness has sparked as much hatred as my Jewishness, as much eliminationist. You don't deserve to live. You don't deserve to be alive. You are an abomination. You are disgusting. And so that kind of sheer unreasoning hatred, when you're talking about movements that are dedicated to sort of nurturing and weaning and nurturing and expressing the fullness of that kind of unhinged hatred. I think you take, just like far-right movements are sort of distillation of the ambient misogyny, anti-Blackness, anti-Semitism, anti-queerness of any given society. I think anti-fatness is also part of that equation, especially when any of these identities overlap, but also as an almost eugenic impulse towards, racial hygiene is the neo-Nazi term. So, that's something that when we consider what a normative body is and why we hate or loathe bodies that don't look that way. Sometimes racism is a big part of it, and sometimes the eugenics style impulse is part of it too. So I think those are the ways I see the two sort of the far right and anti-fatness intersecting.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you bringing up, as you did earlier today, this sort of like the role of eugenics in all of this, because it is really hard to talk about anti-fatness and talk about the experiences of fat folks without really quickly getting into some logic that feels deeply steeped in sort of eugenic ideas, right? That there is this sort of proud vision of a world without fat people as being like the best version of the world, and that is a view that is upheld in a lot of public health systems. It's a view that's upheld in, you know, many sort of public policy arenas. It's a view that's held by lots of people who think of themselves as egalitarians and as good people, right? Really, truly believe that a world without fat people in it would be a better world, which is real bitter pill to swallow. Whoop! Doesn't feel great.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't think a world without you or me would be better. And some commenters mentioned Belly of the Beast by Deshaun Harrison and Fear of the Black Body by Sabrina Strings, Fearing the Black Body, which are excellent reads on the intersection of anti-fatness and racism. So that's something else to consider. And so here's another question. How does anti-fatness show up on the left? And how can we more effectively tackle it? Not that we're both siding this. It's just that anti-fatness is on both sides. It's everywhere.
Yeah. And I also think, like, look, totally honestly, like now I'm just talking to Talia. Everyone else isn't really here. I'm just like, we're just talking because my impulse is to say, I actually think there are often times when it is significantly worse on the left. Like there's another real bitter pill. Whoops, sorry. In that we organize for universal health care and for more access to health care, and often do that unflinchingly, pointing to that as an end to the obesity epidemic, right? That we take public policy approaches like sin taxes on sodas and sort of foods that are perceived as unhealthy and foods that are aligned with sort of foods that poor people eat, rather than increasing access to food stamps and to more kinds of foods for more kinds of people in more kinds of settings, right? There's sort of a lot there. I mean, I think the way that jumps out to me the most and that feels like the most like legible version of this is outside of sort of the policy arena, that when there is a political opponent to folks on the left with repugnant politics, I'm thinking about folks like Trump, like Chris Christie, like Mike Huckabee, like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, right? There are plenty of fat people with real garbage politics from where I stand. It's fine. And rather than unpacking the harms of those politics and going hard on like, these are people who are pushing xenophobic policies. These are people who are pushing racist policies. These are people who are causing concrete harm to many communities every day. Instead of doing that, we reach for, look how fat he is, Mara Lardass, right? We reach for the picture of Trump playing tennis with his butt looking big, right? Like there's just this sort of memification of fat hate that becomes, like, I get how people get there. It's sort of a steam valve for frustration with some really terrifying sort of political figures, as far as I'm concerned. And also, I don't think it does anybody any favors to just rely on like they're terrible because of their body, or even to try and, you know, again, sort of unpack those politics and say, and also they're fat. Look how gross and fat they are. Like, even if you do all those things, then also going like, and they're fat is like not really helping. And all it's really doing is sending a message to fat people who are activists, fat people who are voters, that like, we are not welcome. We're not welcome, we are not desired. And that if we disagree at any point, our bodies will be sort of in the rhetorical crosshairs in a way that feels really tricky. And then the last thing that I would say on this front is that, generally speaking, so prior to writing this book and starting this podcast, I spent about a dozen years as a community organizer, sort of popularizing unpopular issues. And in that time, I worked with a ton of incredible people, and overwhelmingly the culture of sort of progressive and leftist spaces was, if anti-fatness happens, we're not doing anything. And some people may laugh at, you know, fat people's concerns with anti-fatness, and some folks may dismiss them. Whatever it is, we're not standing up to anti-fatness when we see it, and often we're reinforcing it without thinking about it too much. So lots and lots of ways is what I would say to that question. How about you, bud?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about, I'm like, really the biggest problem you have with Donald Trump is he's fatter than Barack Obama. That's the hugest moral issue you see here,
Yeah.
just the obsession with his sort of physical body. And, you know, I always understood when you saw these like ubermenschy like fan art of Trump and being like, no, but he's fat. I'm like, I get it. But like, this is not our central problem with this guy. And in fact, his body looks more like most American bodies than, say, like that super slim portrait of Obama that you keep weirdly posting, like, stop sexualizing politicians anyway. But or like whatever, do what you want in the privacy of your own bedroom, but it's annoying. The other thing I see is I see on the left, like, and this is more online, like I'm not that much of an in-person community organizer. I do my organizing by writing a lot of stuff, real persuasively, or I try. Oh, I had one more. I had a funny anecdote about the far right and fatness, but I'll try to wedge it in somewhere else. But so there's that. I mean, it's like
give it to me. I want to know what it is. I want to know what it is.
So this is funny. So I, for Culture Warlords, I sorry, I have to do that.
It's
like,
so good. I'm really into these like Vanna White moments.
Yeah, like so I'm like, you know, I'm like QVCing my book over here, but no, I went to a sort of quasi Nazi-ish conference of like right-wing YouTubers, led by Tim Pool and Andy Ngo, Portland's own hideous fascist ghoul, Andy Ngo, who, by the way, is like extremely anti-fat. Like he loves to highlight when he does his like roundups, like a 5 minutes of hate roundups of like protesters that have been arrested. He always highlights fat, Black, and trans people for his audience of like militant, murderous racists. But yeah, so I went to that conference to cover it, not for fun. And I was like live tweeting the proceedings, like when people said the N-word or my weird conversation with Andy, and you know, and I eventually, like, this guy like got up in my face and wouldn't stop harassing me, and then someone else like sort of just started dogging my every step because I'd said I was a journalist, and she was like, cool, I don't believe in race mixing, and then I tweeted it out trying to get me to take down my tweet. But anyway, they wrote, Andy Ngo wrote in his publication, The Post Millennial, that I had waddled away like a pigeon. I wasn't actually chased out of the conference. I was chased out of. But the thing about that, so yes, that's another far right example. But what you see on the left, I think, online especially, is there's a certain weaponization of irony, right? This idea of like whoever cares the least can be cool, the coolest, and ways in which misogyny and anti-fatness are sort of bundled up into that stance of detached irony. You know, like what, first of all, like it's like we're class reductionists, meaning we care about the white working class, but we'll also make fun of their bad teeth and big guts whenever it's sort of politically convenient for us. I think that's a very common feature of centrism, of this idea of like anyone that I politically disagree with is a fat Cletus in his mother's basement. I'm like, okay, cool. You're not saying anything favorable about yourself here. But also, again, it's this irony. It's this like, you're, you know, people who are nominally comrades that I have, you know, lots of mutual followers with, say like, you're a disgusting whale, and how dare you post that picture of yourself, and like, you know, it was like I posted pictures of myself on a hike. Like I was like hiking in like the fall woods, and people went absolutely insane and were very cruel. And then to say like, no, I'm fat, but I'm a human being and you should treat me as such. People really like take umbrage at that, take exception. Say like, no, you're not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not actually someone that should be considered a full human, whether because you're a woman or you're fat or both. Yeah. And that is like comfortably allowed to exist on the left without being challenged.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like each sort of form of oppression that we're talking about here and sort of writ large, right, reveals a little bit about the logic of dehumanization of people, right? And it feels like anti-fatness, part of what it reveals is, to me, that movements that are like overtly invested in recasting communities as being fully human and fully deserving of sort of space in what society writ large, right? Policy conversations, whatever the things are, that even in those spaces, fat folks are still not really welcome. I mean, I think I've heard very similar things from disabled activists for a long time, right? That there is like plenty that happens that's just sort of illustrates to fat folks, to disabled folks, to you know, many kinds of people that we're just like categorically unwelcome.
Right. Yeah, no,
spaces.
absolutely. And it's like, but also like anti-fatness is more welcome than fat comrades. And that to me is so shitty. It's just so like astronomically shitty. Like there's nowhere safe for us.
Yeah.
So that's why fat liberation is necessary.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So the next question is, I think, relevant to both of us. I'm gonna just close my door.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll leave you hanging. In the meantime, vamp.
Hi everybody, I'm vamping. I don't know, guys. I feel like my weaknesses are being revealed here. That was so fast, and I'm so grateful that it was so fast. You just left it. I was like, just panic, just like full panic. Hello and welcome back.
Sorry, I was just like, no, but
you're fine.
My housemate came in, and I was like, oh shit, my door. Reading the comments, yes, whales are majestic creatures, and I did an entire like 35 episodes of a podcast about Moby Dick. So yes, they are majestic, but nonetheless, when people are calling you that, they're not saying you are a majestic cetacean, queen of the ocean, and a valuable source of light for the human race for hundreds of years. They mean you suck and aren't human.
Yeah.
So the question was, how does the logic of anti-fatness relate to straightness versus queerness? How does anti-fatness show up in queer spaces, and how can we address it? As two fat queer ladies, I think we were definitely qualified to talk about this.
We got some stuff to say. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, where would you, I feel like the thing that I get stuck on as it relates to fatness and queerness, I mean, first of all, I would just say, like, in queer spaces, anti-fatness is alive and well. Don't worry about it. We got plenty. And as a social project, it feels like, you and I talked about this a little bit earlier today. It feels to me like the logic that is used to pressure fat people, and particularly fat people who are read as women, into weight loss is relentlessly heterosexual. Like, compulsory heterosexuality is everywhere in that logic, right? That it's like, don't you want to be around your kids? Don't you want to lose weight for the wedding? Don't you want to be able to wear this dress? Don't you want to be able to date this dude? Right? That like all of these sorts of things feel like deeply wedded to a very narrow sort of white middle class. Sorry, that's my radiator. I live in an old house with steam heat, and it just clangs sometimes.
It's vamping.
It's vamping for me. I'm terrible at vamping. The radiator's great at it. That it just feels like there is this incredibly, like, this is the like 2.5 children, white picket fence, white family in a suburban house sort of image that gets deployed by people who don't even buy into that image, or using that rhetoric to sort of move folks toward weight loss and pressure fat folks to lose weight. That feels like a big one to me. And then the other thing I'll say, I expect that these dynamics have changed since the last time I was in LGBT organizing spaces, but there was quite a bit of pressure from thinner queer ladies. And the work that I did in LGBT organizing was around marriage, it was around trans healthcare, it was around anti-bullying stuff, all of that kind of stuff for LGBT folks. And there was from a handful of thin queer ladies, there was quite a bit of concern about seeing fat queer ladies as representative of the movement in any way, that folks were really concerned that we wouldn't appear credible if it didn't look like we were taking care of ourselves, or if it didn't, right, like that there was this, because of the sort of like pressure from a predominantly straight society that was like deciding when and whether to dole out rights to LGBT folks. There was this deep desire and sort of urgent need to feel like we were currying favor with straight people. And like all of this happened sort of in the name of, we want them to think, you know, we want to have sort of present this image of the community, and fat queer people are not the image that we want to present, which is similar to sort of the logic that drives like employment discrimination and stuff like that, right? Is like, you're not the image we want to present. Those feel like the big ones to me. I'm curious about, for you, Bud, how does all of this show up for you? The fatness and queerness stuff.
Well, I also wanted to add that same logic has definitely appeared in the feminist movement. I mean, because so much of the stigma against feminism was it's unattractive people, you know, unattractive women. So it's like, you know, it's not a coincidence that one of the more famous feminists for a long time was Gloria Steinem. And I don't know if you've seen Gloria Steinem when she was younger, in particular. I mean, she's gorgeous now, but she was like a stone fox back in the day, and like she was front and center. Like none of the fat, weird, queer Jewish ladies that were like hidden, right? So something I think about a lot. First of all, this is the debut of my super gay haircut, so
I'm so into it, and I'm living vicariously through you. It's the haircut I've never had the guts to get, and I'm very into it.
Yeah, well,
good work, buddy.
No problem. I was like, and I did have this feeling of like, will this fit the shape of my face? Will I look more double chinny, you know, whatever. Fuck that. If I want gay hair, I can have gay hair. I think for a lot of trans folks, because transness is a sort of condition of being that often intersects with the medical establishment, there is a ton of transphobia and fat phobia in healthcare. A lot of people before getting gender affirming care and surgery are required to lose tremendous amounts of weight, often in ways that are unhealthy and possibly unsustainable. So it's like, to save your life, to let you live as you truly are, you have to change your body. So that's a major way that, you know, fatness, anti-fatness and anti-queerness intersect. Also, I think for gay men, you know, this idea of needing to have a perfect, ripped body, and, you know, this sort of idea of like, unless you fit like the specific sort of physical type of a bear, you need to be super ripped and super thin, or you can't be a good gay man. I think that's really pervasive from what I've talked to with gay male friends. And then I think just like when you're queer and, you know, certainly on the romance circuit, you know, you have to contend with all the fat phobia of normal society, plus also queer phobia. And yeah, sorry, Luca, yeah, gay trans men.
Oof, indeed. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And as Deanna said, you know, right, like if you want to present as non-binary, if you want to present as trans, you need to seem androgynous and sort of ethereal, and these are not things we connect with fat bodies. So that people's gender identities become invalidated by their fatness in ways that are incredibly cruel. And like, so again, it's the story of like, we replicate the prejudices that are inherent in our society, even in the spaces that we build and dream to be free of prejudice. Yeah, so I think we probably only have time for one more like you and me question, and then
and then we'll do some audience questions. I'm down.
Yeah, but I think this one sort of cuts to the heart of things, and we've addressed it in various ways. But what are our respective experiences of trolling and doxing? And what does that mean to put that kind of trauma and targeting into our books?
Ooh. Yeah, totally. So like, what are they is the least exciting part of this. Like, what are the experiences? And I mean, I feel like you and I have some overlap, and then you have like overtaken me in the world of trolling and doxing in ways that I really do not envy. But well, for me, it's mostly been like, you know,
Well, you were
like,
anonymous for a long time.
I was anonymous for a long time, in part because of the volume of trolling that was going to be coming my way, right? Like talking about being a fat person in a way that asks anything of thin people is not usually met with a great deal of grace. I'll say that. I will say, you know, sort of trolling and doxing for me has meant that my home address has fallen into the hands of people who I would rather didn't have it. My cell phone number has fallen into the hands of people I'd rather didn't have it. All kinds of stuff. I mean, you know, death threats and threats of sexual violence and all kinds of stuff. And I think I have, well, there are two things that I'll say. One, each time that has happened, I've looked into who the person is that this is coming from, as far as I can tell. I think you and I have this in common, this like unhealthy question mark level of curiosity where trolls are.
If you and I did it and Lindy West did it, like how bad can it be?
That's right. That's right. All right, I'll take it. And I think the take-home point is, I think in the same way that you were talking about, sort of folks have this like very cartoonish image of like a fat person in their mom's basement or whatever, about conservative voters. They also have that about trolls, right? There's this belief that trolls exist somewhere else, that they're like the worst of humanity and they're not people that you know. And every time I have looked into who's been trolling me, it has been overwhelmingly like parents of small kids. It has been overwhelmingly like teachers and healthcare providers and people in sort of helping professions, right? They have been people of all genders. They have been people of all sexualities. They have been people of all races, though they are, I will definitely say, predominantly white, predominantly white over here. And it feels really telling. And that's one of the things that I just super duper appreciate in Culture Warlords, is that you are sort of relentless in that book about like, no, these are deeply human people. These are people that you know. And that's exactly why we can't let them off the hook, because they are people, and they are people that you know. And if they can't see your humanity, right, like then what chance do we stand? That's got to be met with heavy levels of accountability, right? That's what I would say is like, it's a hard thing. Although I will say on fat stuff, not as hard as the people who think they're like helping me, right? That's the worst of the worst for me. That's the stuff that haunts me more than anybody having my home address or whatever. Like, that's the stuff that troubles me the most. How about you? Talk to me about trolling and doxing, and like, you have had the gnarliest of gnarly experiences.
Well, it's all relative, right? Because like I'm like, oh, like compared to some of my like anti-fascist friends, like I've had nothing. But then I'm like, but the FBI showed up to your door and like we're like, you've had death and rape threats. And I'm like, tell me something I didn't know, FBI. No, actually, I was like, how'd you get my address? They have ways,
Yeah.
but like I'm like, yeah, I kind of knew. I definitely want to, I mean, plus one to the like, they're people you know, and they're regular people, and they have good jobs, and they have wives, and they have lives. And that applies to Nazis, and that applies to trolls. You know, that applies to, I mean, some of the most obsessively hateful people I've encountered are like, just, you wouldn't look twice seeing them on the street. They're not fat. And they're, you know, they're not anything particularly remarkable. They're just like have a certain grinding loathing of fat people, of women, of Jews that they need to like feel the need to express. And like I've had crazy shit happen, sure. Like, you know, literally the organizer of Unite the Right, Jason Kessler, who, by the way, now has to pay a crap ton of money to a bunch of people he hurt thanks to the successful outcome of the Sines versus Kessler trial in Charlottesville today. He posted my mom's office address to a neo-Nazi blog just because he was mad. I don't even remember what he was mad about. Like, it's shit like that where just, you know, and I would say this, I think this is something that, you know, without going into too many war stories or blah, 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 you know, of course, the sexual violence stuff is always present. Like, it was like, I was literally, I was eavesdropping on a Nazi chat. I talked about this in the book. And they started talking about me, not knowing I was there under a sock puppet name, and like whether they would rape me or not. And they decided I was too ugly to rape and they would only rape me with a gun. And I was like watching this happen because I was like busy dipping my nose into Nazi spaces. But so that's just the kind of lovely stuff that can happen when you're public and Jewish, and you know, you say like, I don't think Nazis are good and there should be fewer. But something that I like, the thing is like, there's so much pressure to not feed the trolls, pretend that it doesn't hurt you, pretend it rolls off your back and you don't see it. I pretend I do not see it, you know, that you have to be sort of bigger than and rise above. And actually, like, when enough people do shit like Photoshop your body and face in ways that make you look like a weird witch, or talk endlessly for like dozens of forum pages about your smell and your, well, the way you look, and like post your photos and minutely analyze them for how gross they are, it gets to you. Like, I look in the mirror sometimes and I see the person they talk about. I see myself as a grotesque being. And it takes work to untangle it. And like, sometimes I don't succeed. Sometimes it like, and also anyone that tells you don't feed the trolls, like, should fuck off, because the trolls feed on you. Yeah. The trolls feed on you daring to exist as a person they hate, whether it's because you're fat and happy, or Jewish and proud, or, you know, Black and not like ashamed about it, or whatever it is. Like, they feed on your existence. So your reaction almost doesn't matter. Like, they'll be there. Yeah. So yeah, you can't and also it is a human evolutionary urge to like take in criticism more deeply than we take in praise, because that's how you survive, by not getting kicked out of the tribe. And so like, yeah, it sinks in, and I don't let it stop me. I'm a very stubborn, very angry person. And I think under your sunny demeanor and delicious laughter, you have a healthy and righteous anger as well. And so we got to keep on. We got to keep on keeping on. Right?
Yeah, I'm driven by a grudge match. I'll laugh about it, but I'm definitely driven by a grudge match. Absolutely. It also feels like, as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking about like the levels of superhuman that we expect people in marginalized communities to be, right? That like, no matter what happens, you're just supposed to take it on the chin and keep moving. And I think that expectation comes from a place of like not really fully understanding what the weight of this stuff is, and how it impacts, you know, like really and truly. I think this will, I don't know, sound weak or something to people who haven't experienced it, but there are absolutely days where you wake up and get an email and then I can't write for the rest of the day, right? Like, or I just power down, right? And it just like, you just gotta stop for a little while. And I think that that expectation of sort of being able to rise above anything and everything is born of not understanding what the anything and everything actually is, which is part of the reason why it felt important to put it in the book. Is like, no, this is the sort of depths that folks will sink to. This is the real impact of this kind of stuff. It really does stink. And it is doing a disservice to people who are being targeted in this way, to tell them to just sort of get over it is not.
Or project strength at all costs, because that can kill you inside. And your book, I think, does a masterful job of sort of weighing interpersonal and systemic cruelties and pointing out that, yes, this is systemic. But the interpersonal cruelty hurts too, especially as you noted, the cruelty disguised as kindness. Like, oh
boy, it stinks.
it's just, oh, like, you want a kid, so like, you have to lose 50 pounds before you think about that, that kind of thing. Anyway, we have 22 questions from the
audience.
so
many questions.
And we have like
questions.
We have like eight minutes until the lovely folks of Powell's are going to kick us off. So I want to try to get to 3 questions at least from the audience. My apologies to everyone. I absolutely hogged Aubrey for this. Okay, we have a lot of different questions and a lot of different vectors. Here's one that I like from Trudy Goals. Goels, I don't know. In your opinion, what is the biggest system we could organize and change that would radically improve the lives of fat folks?
I mean, so here's the thing that feels tricky to me. This is like the what's the Everest, right, question, which is just like, what's the biggest, hardest thing that we could do? Or what's the most impactful thing that we could do? And part of the reason that it feels like a tricky question to answer, I have an answer, but part of the reason that it feels like a tricky question to answer is that overwhelmingly institutions are not trying. So I'm like, I would like to answer this question again after somebody starts putting some shoulder into this, right? Like, I'm like, then we would have a different conversation. I mean, I think quite a bit of it, to my mind, I would say like access to healthcare. Which does not mean the same thing as universal healthcare, although universal healthcare would certainly help, right? But if fat folks have access to universal healthcare and we still have the same levels of anti-fat bias in medicine that we do now, that's not necessarily going to result in significant improvements of the health or perceived health of fat folks, right? So I do think like overwhelmingly, sorry, clanging radiator. It does feel to me like, if fat folks show up for healthcare, if we're able to access healthcare, we should also be able to access competent and kind and meaningful healthcare. That one seems to me like, if you could keep us alive, that would be great. And too many fat folks seek out care and don't end up being kept alive for like pretty deeply preventable reasons. That feels like a big one to me. I don't know. What would you say, bud?
I think I'll leave that one to you. I agree.
Very cool.
I mean, not dying because people think we're ugly is like pretty big.
Feels like a basic one.
Yeah. And like, I will say my beloved is a medical student, and his education has featured a lot more sort of, at least in one school, has featured more humanizing stuff about fat people. And conversations about fat stigma. So I do have a hope of the next generation of doctors, but yeah, like I think every fat person has had that experience of being completely dehumanized at a GP, and it's like, okay, sure, but just can you fix my whatever leg? So I'm gonna so Anonymous asks, do you have suggestions for people struggling to come out as fat / not trying to lose weight? I know I can't hide being fat, but I've really struggled with being open with people in my life about the fact that I am no longer working on weight loss and no longer ashamed of being fat, or at least getting there.
Yeah, so I am genuinely like having a hard time coming up with this one because it's been a minute since I did this. It's been like 10 years, I think, since I first started telling people like, I'm not going to be dieting anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I mean, like anything, like I think the interesting thing about coming out as a fat person versus coming out as a queer person is that like coming out as a fat person is like a master class in setting and maintaining boundaries that like, at least in some cases, I'm able to like come out as queer and people are like, got it, moving on, right? But as coming out as a fat person, there's like this constant sort of vigilance that is required. So, I mean, like, I would say start with the people who are closest to you and who are most likely to get it. Start with people who have some understanding of systemic oppression and exclusion and that kind of thing, and who are flexible thinkers. That has been helpful to me. And the other thing that has been helpful to me is like practicing phrases that are just like I'm actually not going to talk about that. Or like, I'm not interested in weight loss. What else do you want to talk about? Or sort of whatever the things are, just like quick, easy pivots have been really helpful to me. How about you? What you got, bud?
Well, more recently, I've started this whole running thing, and I've been very open from the start. Like, I am not doing this to lose weight. I am doing this because I'm tired of having like 10 panic attacks a day, and this might help. Or I want some feeling about my body that isn't just like blah, of just being present in it. And I found it very helpful in that sense. But like, I very much have to consciously sort of publicly say and privately constantly say, I am not doing this to lose weight. Like, exercise, I think in particular, is so toxically coupled with weight loss, when actually it just feels good to move. And like, all of us should be able to feel at home moving in our bodies. And even if like we're, lots of folks are disabled, can't move in the same way, but there are lots of different forms of exercise. And I think it's just a matter of kind of sort of constantly talking to yourself too, as well as other people, and saying like, I'm doing this because I deserve a better life. And that doesn't necessarily mean being smaller. Like, better, smaller isn't better for me. Okay, so one more, I think we have time for one more question. How can people living in smaller bodies best leverage thin privilege to show up better for the fat people in their lives, especially those of us who are new to the activism space?
Okay, this is a great question. And I have a answer ready to go, which is you should ask the fat people in your life what they need from you, and you should do those things. That's like step one, right? So like, if you have a fat coworker and you're setting up an event or what have you, asking that person what they need at that event, like, how's the seating for them? How's the whatever, right? Like, asking your friends and family who are fat folks, like, hey, have I been showing up for you? Are there ways that I can do that better? Doors open. You can give me feedback any old time. Like, I really think folks are more accustomed to more developed movements that have more structures for sort of accountability, more structures for like the right steps are this, then this, then this, then this. And I actually think on fat stuff, the bar is pretty low, right? So it really is a case of like, all you have to do is like try some things. All you got to do is ask people what they need and then show up with, ways to help them meet those needs. That's pretty much it. I mean, I would say, oh, here's a good one that's very easy. When I go out with friends, I absolutely still remember the first time I went out with a friend. We walked into a restaurant that was mostly booths that had the chairs and tables both bolted to the floor, which means there is a fixed width in which a body can fit. And my body is never that fixed, like never that fixed width. We walked in and my friend just looked at me and went, where do you want to sit? And just actually let me pick where we sat. And also was like, do you want to go somewhere else? We could go somewhere else, right? Like, even just that, it's not explicitly about fatness. It's not a big, like, I am showing up for you. It's happening now, right? It's just like, I get that this is a tough situation. Where do you want to sit? Like, that was huge, huge, huge for me. How about you, bud? Are there ways that thin folks have shown up for you or that you wish they would?
I can't think of an example of thin folks showing up for me. Alas, it's not that common. I would just say, in keeping with my more militant
do it
approach to the world, is like, don't be a fucking coward. If someone is saying shitty anti-fat stuff in front of you and in front of your fat friend, don't be a fucking coward. Don't be more afraid of what they'll think of you if you stand up for your friend and for all fat people everywhere. Like, don't be ashamed. Just fucking do it, because you'll be better for it. Like, actually, you will be better for it. Whoever you're chastising might still be a dick at the end of it, but you won't be. So think about it.
I really feel like while you were saying that, I was like, oh, I feel like I just unlocked the key to this whole conversation, which is just like starring Talia Lavin as the id and Aubrey Gordon as the super ego. Together we are like a fully formed approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Team
like
fat
it.
liberation.
Yeah, that's right. I'm totally
and-
down with that. Abso-fucking-lutely. Like,
And the final, the very last question is: have you heard from Oprah or Dr. Oz?
no. I don't expect that I will ever hear from Oprah or Dr. Oz. And if I do, I anticipate that it will be a cease and desist. It'll be the first shot across the bow. I expect it will be through their lawyers if that happens. Sorry, team.
Well, never cease, never desist.
Never cease, never desist. That's right.
Thanks
Yeah,
to the
I think, hold on just a second here. I don't want to end with Dr. Oz. I think we should do another 5 minutes. So let's do another 5 minutes. Go.
Okay,
Great.
Kevin,
Great.
Kevin, are there any questions that pop out at you? I mean, I guess we could end on like a positive question. Yeah.
I got a little quick hit while y'all are sorting through questions.
So many questions.
One person asked, what do you think of the term body neutrality? And I will say very quickly, whatever you need to get yourself through the day of thinking about your body and having a body, go forth. It is important to be clear that body neutrality is a good lens. If it works for you, use it for understanding your own body. That is not the same thing as a liberation movement for fat people. And changing the way that you see your own body is a lot of work and a lot of challenge, and it won't necessarily change the way that you show up or don't for fat people. So just know that that is work that also exists and that needs to happen. It'll be linked to the way that you see your own body, but it won't be like fixing the way that you see your own body and making peace with your own body won't necessarily directly give way to. And now I am a hero of the fat people, right? Like that's not necessarily the next step. You gotta do that part too. That's what I would say.
Okay, so here's, I think, a good question to end on. It's also from an anonymous attendee. On the flip side of trolling, what have been joyful moments as a result of your work? I know, Aubrey, you've touched so many people's lives, so give me one joyful thing. Come on.
I've got a deeply joyful one, and then I would like to hear a joyful one from you, which is I got an email the other day from someone who is a listener to the show, who is a fat person and a trans person and has been really just slogging through their relationship with their mom, and had shared the podcast with their mom, and their mom sat them down and apologized to them for like an itemized list of things. And I was like, oh my God, none of us knew it was possible. The moms are apologizing, right? Like it just felt like this huge, incredible moment. I mean, I feel like there have also been like, whatever, like media outlets pick it up or famous people read it or whatever the things are. But like, honestly, when someone's like, I had written off my mom and now my mom's apologizing to me, that feels like I'm genuinely, I don't know if you can see that I have goosebumps just talking about it, but like very genuine goosebumps from that one. I think the reader and listener emails are the source of like a bunch of my life force these days. How about you, buddy? Give me a moment of joy. Did you get to use one of your swords? No.
I've never decapitated anyone yet.
Okay. I mean, never say never.
Never say die.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, it's hard to find joy covering the far right. I'll be honest. I mean, there's camaraderie with other people who do, and that can be incredibly meaningful. Just like we're all in the same weird boat where like poison is floating through our brains at all times. I enjoyed getting Milo Yiannopoulos banned from PayPal.
What?
Yeah, because he sent me $14.88, which is like Nazi code 1488. But I was like, fuck you, Milo. I'm posting this, and he got banned from PayPal, and now he's broke. I mean, it's not like that. It's a little vengeful, but I will say this: just like, so I've been enjoying Substack. My Substack is the sword and the sandwich.substack.com. I'm gonna shamelessly post a link here.
Do it.
Consider subscribing. But so I recently did a series because I'm looking at the American right sort of more holistically, or bigger, or just like in ways that wouldn't be amenable to a nice email pitch. I get to write about the far right and sandwiches. But I recently wrote a long series about corporal punishment in evangelical homes. I read like all of these incredibly ghoulish, horrible evangelical parenting books, and I talked to dozens of survivors, and I wrote up the story, and like so many people reached out. You saw me, and like I didn't even know how much I needed to be seen and be told like that wasn't okay, that the way I was wasn't okay. And like I think that moment is the best thing that you get out of being a journalist or being a public advocate, is that moment where someone says, you saw me when no one else did, and you changed the way I think about myself, and you changed my life. You know? And I know you've had that too.
Holy shit, that's amazing. Oh God, I've been trying hard not to swear, and I'm not good at not swearing, guys. That's amazing. That's really, really phenomenal.
I know you've had that too. And that's the moment where you're like, okay, all of this shit that I slog through every single day is worth it, because I made one person today feel more at home in themselves or with their history, or help them understand why they're so angry about something. Help them understand themselves better. That's what we do. So
absolutely. I mean, I can't think of a better note to end it on than that. You just nailed it to the wall, bud. Killing it.
You do. You do.
Thanks, buddy.
Now we're friends.
Now we're pals. We've decided. We're friends now, guys.
Okay. Thanks, Powells. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. This is such a treat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Talia Lavin. That's the Culture Warlords. Awesome. Aubrey, there's your book. These are the hardcovers, but they are in paperback. So I was just fancy by grabbing the hardcovers. I just posted in the chat the link to the book, What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. And you can click on that. There's so many people in the chat. It's like disappeared now. I'm also going to paste in the link to our YouTube channel. And check out our YouTube channel, because it has all of our recorded events that we've been doing through Zoom. Lots of great ones. And this event will be posted up there probably sometime tomorrow afternoon. So if you have other people who want to watch it, you want to share it with people, then make sure that you can click on that YouTube channel link right there I just posted. And you can watch it all again anytime you want.
Bye, everybody. Bye, our beautiful red children.
Yes, indeed. Double whammy of red books. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. And thanks, Aubrey. Thanks, Talia. Everyone, have a great night.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.